Hey everybody, this is your first lecture for AP Microeconomics. Typically I will record these slides and then also link them in Google Classroom. So you'll have the slideshow by itself, and then you'll also have the video recording of me walking you through each of these slides. So I try to do this for most of our lectures. That way you have the interaction with me, my information, but also for reference, you can just go back and look through slides if you missed something. So that's my goal this year. Hopefully we'll make that happen. So your first lecture, I want to go through test information, some more information about AP Classroom on my AP, and then get through the basics of economics. So here we go. One of the most important things to remember is that this is a skills-based course. So what we do in economics is very different than what you've probably experienced in other social studies classes, and definitely different than what you've experienced in AP social studies classes. So the cool thing about economics is it bridges this gap between science and social studies. So it's really a social science, or understanding how people react in certain situations and what can we predict about human behavior. So it's a really cool opportunity for us to analyze the different ways that we as humans make choices as it relates to markets, as it relates to structures and businesses and government interaction. So it's really this combination of social studies, which is the human element, and science, which is the fact-based theories that are provable. So when we think about AP Micro, we're really learning methodology that resembles more of an algebra class or a math class or a science class. So in this course, there's really little room for what if, especially as we dive into just understanding the theory of microeconomics. These theories are practiced and hypothesized against and tested and data driven. So when we get into these what if questions, it really doesn't apply to the foundation of what we're learning. So sometimes I might remind you to turn off the what if portion of your brain and just take the data, take the information that you see in front of you. Second thing to remember, AP Micro and Econ in every sense. It's a really intuitive subject, meaning that when you think something will happen, typically it will happen, but it really requires your precision in explaining why those things happen and explaining the process for the manipulation. So it's intuitive in the sense that what you think is going to happen usually does, but your precision in understanding and being able to explain why that happens is really significant. So when we think about the way the course is laid out, we use FRQs, which are free response questions, and multiple choice questions. And when we think about FRQs, one of the things I want you to remember is that they're more similar to math or science questions, and they really can't be fluffed. So this is what I mean by this. I'm going to move myself out of the way here. Sorry, I just made myself giant. So when we think about looking at FRQs, typically what you'll see is a scenario, which is the top part. So everything up here is your scenario about Larry's lumber mill. Most of the time you'll be given a graph, or you'll be asked to generate a graph. And then you'll have a series of questions asking you what happens if the following scenario changes. And what I want you to notice, and what is one of the best things about micro and econ, AP Econ, is you'll notice that unlike all of your other social studies classes, you are not typically required to write more than 1 or 2 words, maybe a sentence, but it's really just understanding the process and the methodology behind the actual question. So a lot of times on your FRQs, you'll see things like this being the answer, Q3. You'll see things like this, W2 being the answer. And then in some instances, when you see this word explain, you'll be required to write a 1-sentence explanation of the economic understanding that led you to your conclusion. So that's one of the really great things about AP Micro, is it's not like your social studies classes where you're looking at documents and you're writing thesis statements and you're analyzing different primary sources and writing papers on them. In AP Micro, we're really just focused on the facts. What will happen if this happens? What changes when this changes? And those answers are really specific and they're really simple. So that's a really great thing about econ. We really dial into the facts and the data that we have at hand. So we really can't fluff those answers. So when you're looking at doing FRQs for me, I'm gonna, push you to really boil down your answers or your ideas and your thoughts into really basic sentences and really basic understanding, especially for those of you that are planning on taking the AP test. So next up, we have just some exam information. As of right now, so from what I've heard, we are scheduled for a full exam, which is 2 hours and 10 minutes, and it is comprised of 2 sections. Your first section is multiple choice, which is 60 questions, and you get 70 minutes to complete those 60 questions. And this accounts for 2/3 of your exam score. And it ranges everything from really basic, true false questions to more advanced, A, B, A, and B, B only, types of questions. So we'll practice multiple choice throughout the semester, but know that that is part of the scheduled exam. Second part is free response section, which is comprised of 3 separate questions. You will see a long free response and 2 short free responses. We will practice both kinds during this class, eventually building up to completing 3 free response questions at the end of a unit. So that's how I will attempt to get you ready for the test for those of you who are taking it. Test day is May 12th, which is a Wednesday, and it's in the afternoon, so it's at 12:00 p.m. Any information that I get as the semester progresses, I will absolutely keep you guys posted. If there are changes to the exam, if there are changes to the date or the time, if there's changes to the structure, I will keep you all informed. Next thing I want to make sure you do before we meet next time, so before, let's see, when do we meet again? Tuesday, or actually Wednesday of next week, so we have a funky week. Please make sure that you've signed into my AP, have joined my course. I left the login right here for you guys and then the join code. So please make sure you do that. We do complete some of our tests and quizzes via AP Classroom, so you want to make sure that you're logged in and you know how to do that, and I can answer any questions about that on Friday if you have questions. So let's dive in to what econ actually is. Here you are. So I'm going to get rid of myself. This is what you should be taking notes on. So all of these lectures, you have these PowerPoints, but any additional information that you can jot down is really important. I also think there's a really strong link between handwriting your notes and processing information. So I highly recommend, as you are going through these lectures, as you are going through this course, anytime that I'm giving you these PowerPoints and walking you through these lectures, whether they're recorded or virtual or in the off chance that we end up back here at Wheat Ridge, hybrid, I highly recommend taking notes by hand. I always try to make sure that I illustrate important information, so things that are underlined will be important, things that are in different colors are important, so kind of your bare minimum. And I also try to underline, you should definitely write this down. So keep those ears open, keep your eyes open, and follow along. So basic understanding of economics, and we talked about this in class on Thursday, is really just looking at the science of scarcity. So our understanding of economics is understanding that society has an unlimited amount of wants, but a limited amount of resources. That at the base level is the driving principle in all economic study, is this idea of scarcity. Scarcity doesn't mean that we are short of something, so a shortage is going to be very specific. Scarcity is this overarching, pervading idea that we have lots and lots of wants and needs, but in order to fulfill those wants and needs, we have to strategically use our limited resources. In addition to that, since we're unable to have everything we want and need, we have to make choices based on how we'll use our resources. So it's the science of scarcity and the study of choices. So we look at, in microeconomics, the study of choices based on scarcity for individuals, firms, and governments on a small scale level. So we're looking at individual decisions with small scale consequences. So understanding myself as a consumer and the choices that I make, understanding the producer or supplier's perspective and the choices they make. How many shoes are they going to produce? And then also understanding the role of government as it relates to how they decide what to provide, and the science of making those choices for society. So when we think about econ, what I want you to think about is the way in which we make choices based on this basic foundational principle of scarcity. So a couple of examples that we think about are how we make our choices on a micro scale. So you specifically have to choose between buying jeans or buying shoes. You have a paycheck from your job, you're at the mall, you can't buy both, you have to pick. Businesses do the same thing. They have to choose how many people to hire, how many machines to create or purchase. Governments do the same thing. They have to choose how much to spend on welfare, on public parks. So we're looking at small scale decision making at an individual level. So the textbook definition, something that I think you should write down, is that economics is the social science concerned with the efficient use of scarce resources to achieve maximum satisfaction of economic wants. Basically, it's how individuals and societies deal with scarcity. It's the choices they make because we have scarcity as this foundational principle of economics. And again, we think of it as a social science because we're dealing with human behavior, and humans tend to be predictable, but also have free will outside of, if we're looking at a science class or a math class, we're not really dealing with human brain function, right? So if you're in a science class, you can study why a plant grows a specific way. That plant doesn't have the same higher level thinking skills as a human does. So the social aspect, the human element, tends to throw us a curveball every once in a while, but we're still a science because we have tried and true principles that we can theorize, we can collect data for, and then we can prove with various different methods. So your basic understanding of our two different types of economics, and some of you may have taken a macro class, or you may be taking a macro class next year. So understanding the difference between these two elements is important. So you're in microeconomics, which is the study of small economic units. Just like I talked about before, it's individuals, firms, industries. So looking at specific markers, supply and demand of a specific market, let's say for cat sweaters, production costs for those specific cat sweaters, labor markets for one specific area. So really dialing into small independent decision making. On the flip side, macroeconomics is the study of large economies as a whole. So looking at economic aggregates. So taking the sum total of everything that is involved in microeconomics and blowing it up and looking at it on a big scale. So understanding things like government spending, economic growth, unemployment, international trade, all done in a global or large scale macro study. So those two differences are really key, and I can almost guarantee that in a multiple choice question, you will have to answer what is the difference between these two studies, or how are these two ideas different? So next thing is we want to think about how economics is used. So like I said earlier, it's really intuitive, but also very precise. So when we think about how we use economics in the real world, we do have certain situations where we look at behaviors of the economy and human decision making in order to make decisions. So if you wanted to study economics, further on, you really are looking at using the scientific method to make generalizations and abstractions and develop theories. So this is the theoretical piece, right? You say, why does demand change when consumer choice changes, right? So that you come up with a question and you come up with a theory. You say, why does this happen when this happens? Once we test those theories and apply those theories, then we use them to fix problems or meet economic goals. So the two ways that we use economics is either theoretical economics, developing theories, asking questions, why does this happen? Or typically we see this in a more real sense is policy economics. So you have businesses who hire economists, governments who hire economists to take those theories in action, fix them, figure them out, and provide policy in meeting economic goals. There's also two ways that we talk about economics, positive versus normative. So when we think about economics, most of what we deal with is from a positive economic standpoint. These are our fact-based, avoiding value judgment, what is the data at hand sort of statements. When we are looking at economic decision making, sometimes we get into these ideas of normative economics or including value judgment or what should be. So when I think about how we teach economics in this class, 95% of the time we position ourselves with positive economic statements. Here is the data for this particular source, right? So the government decides, or the government wants to create a new park. Here's the data on how much that park costs. Here's the data on how much benefit that park provides. Those are your facts, right? The normative is we think as a government we should provide more parks even if the cost outweighs the benefits because it ought to help people enjoy nature more. So it's that very different slight between what it is and what policymakers or people think it should be. We can also look at it in terms of unemployment, right? We could look at the data for unemployment and take a percentage. The unemployment rate is 6.8%. That's the positive statement. The normative statement becomes the unemployment rate is 6.8%, but it should be higher because it doesn't fully account for minority unemployment, which is at 10.2%. So it's just slightly switching the way that we talk about things. Like I said, when we think about economics in this class, 95% of the time we're stuck in the positive statements, right? We're sticking to facts. We're looking at, what's the data at hand. But every once in a while, I might ask you to place a value judgment. So here's what it is. What do you think it should be? And if that's the case, how do you want to get there? Going back to that idea of policy economics. How should they fix that problem? So those are your big concepts for really understanding just the basics of economics. So looking at the science of scarcity, understanding that we must make choices because scarcity is the base foundation of unlimited wants and needs, but limited amount of resources. Hopefully you understand the difference between macro and microeconomics. You know the difference between theoretical and policy economics, and the difference between positive and normative statements. So those are really the foundational kind of definition pieces for this class. So let's dive into some assumptions. These are really key in understanding our Thinking Like an Economist assignment from Thursday. So we looked at things like scarcity. And this is one of the key economic assumptions. We assume that society has unlimited wants, but all resources are limited. So no matter how abundant, how prevalent a resource is, it is always scarce. It is always scarce in the sense that we have to make a choice based on that particular item. Because of this, our second principle or assumption is that because of scarcity, choices have to be made, and every single choice has a cost. And we'll talk about the difference between costs here in a little while, but essentially you face trade-offs, an infinite amount of things that you could have done in order to make the choice that you did. Our third assumption is everyone's goal is to maximize their own self-interest. So everyone acts in their own best interest in order to maximize their satisfaction. So we could argue about, altruism and people who do things out of the kindness of their own heart, but they're still maximizing their satisfaction in that altruistic way. So we always want to make decisions based on what's best for us. We're in an airplane and we put our mask on before helping others. That is one of the things that we assume in economic thinking, that people are driven by their own behavior. Fourth, everything that we do is decided by comparing marginal costs and marginal benefits. And we'll talk about the definition of marginal here in a second. But it's essentially a cost-benefit analysis done most of the time subconsciously. And then last, we always assume that people respond to incentives. So we can look at a certain scenario and we can base our understanding of what will happen because of the incentives that are provided. So overall, when we think about economics, these are the 5 things that we want to keep in the back of our minds. Scarcity is the number one problem that we deal with. It's how we have to study things. Because of scarcity, we make choices and are faced with trade-offs. We do everything in our own self-interest. We measure our costs over our benefits, and we respond predictively to incentives. If we can remember those 5 things, everything that we do for this semester will make sense. The last thing that I want to talk to you all about is this idea of thinking at the margin. So thinking at the margin is really this understanding of additional. So when you hear the word marginal, I want you to think additional. So the question that's posed is, would you see this movie 3 times? And what I want you to notice is that your total benefit is more than the total cost in that third instance, meaning that if you are thinking at the margin, if you are applying those 5 key assumptions, the third time watching that movie doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And here's why. We assign benefit to every single thing that we consume. We also sometimes call this utility or satisfaction. So regardless of what you're consuming, you gain benefits or you gain satisfaction from this thing. So we take this and turn it into an arbitrary measurement. So in this scenario, I want to go see a movie. And the first time that I watched the movie, I would have gladly paid $30 to see that movie. Luckily for me, it only cost me $10, which is awesome. So assigning a quantitative measurement to benefit is really important to our understanding of economics. So I gladly would have paid $30 to see this awesome, super cool movie. It only cost me $10. So I'm in the black. That's great. I love it. Things are going well. I decide I want to go see the movie a second time. What you'll notice is the benefit is not as great as that first time you saw it. So in this scenario, I still loved the movie the second time, but I really only would have paid $15 for it. Lucky for me, the second time I bought a movie ticket, it only cost me $10. So my cost is still less than my benefit. Then I have to make the decision. Do I want to go see this movie a third time? Well, our economic principles tell us that our benefit is going to decline every time we make the same decision. So I see the movie once, it's super awesome, it's worth a ton of money to me. Second time I see it, it's still really awesome, it's still worth more money than I paid. The third time though, based on my understanding of the economic principles, it's really not worth my time or my money. So if I go see the movie the third time, I'm really disappointed. I really would have only paid $5 for it, which means that I should not have seen that movie because it cost me $10 to pay for the ticket. So I want you to remember that thinking at the margin really asks you to analyze one more. Do I go see it one more time? Do I pay for it one more time? And in this scenario, the answer is no. You don't want to do that. You don't want to make that choice, because in that third instance, your cost outweighs your benefit. So when we think about marginal analysis, and this is the last thing that I want to go over today, in economics, the term marginal means additional. So anytime you hear the word marginal, think additional. Thinking on the margin, or this idea of marginal analysis, is really looking at decisions based on additional benefit versus additional cost, the rule of one more. So another example, you've been shopping at the mall for a half hour. The additional benefit, or the marginal benefit of shopping for the marginal half hour, might outweigh the additional cost, right? That's your opportunity cost. So after 3 hours, the additional benefit from staying an additional half hour would likely be less than the additional cost. So when we think about our decision making, when we're spending all of our time in a certain place, we're always looking at how long or how much longer should I stay? And what is it going to cost me? Am I going to spend another half hour and go to 3 more stores and spend all of my paycheck? It's probably not worth it. Or should I cut my losses and go home now? So also think about how you start your decision-making process. So it's not thinking of it as, should I go to the mall at all? Or should I go to the mall for 3 hours? Or should I stay home? It's really, should I go to the mall at all as your first step? And then you're looking at, should I stay or should I go? So you're thinking about, how much longer should I stay in this space? So when we really dial into marginal analysis, this is how we will look at decision making, the one more. So it's really looking at it in a small specific measurement rather than the all or nothing. So it's not, I should go to the mall at all, I should stay home. It's really, should I stay or should I go? The marginal analysis piece is dialing into economic thinking at a smaller scale. Big blue things, whenever you see this lovely starburst, this is absolutely something you should write down. So your very first economic rule is the marginal analysis rule, which tells us that you will continue to do something until the marginal cost outweighs the marginal benefit. So no matter what you're doing, every time you make a decision, subconsciously or consciously, you apply this rule. So marginal analysis rule is, you will continue to do something until the marginal cost outweighs the marginal benefit. When we see each other next time, we'll start analyzing choices. So we'll start looking at the difference between trade-offs and opportunity costs. But keep in mind that when we're analyzing our choices, we're thinking on the margin. We're applying those understandings and that thinking to the basic economic principle of scarcity. And we're also keeping in the back of our mind our 5 key assumptions. We have scarcity, we have to make choices, which means trade-offs. We do everything in our own self-interest. We respond to incentives, and we do everything by thinking on the margin. That is your first lecture for the year. Enjoy, watch this between now and next Wednesday, and I will see you all in class. If you have any questions, I am available for office hours on Friday, and you can shoot me an email or send me a GChat or a Google Hangouts chat, and I would love to dial into this a little bit more if you have questions. Otherwise, go through this. You'll see this recording as well as the actual slides to the PowerPoint to go back to, and I will talk to you all soon. Have a great day.